Donald Trump promised radical change, and today, on his first full day in the office here behind me, it really got underway. In a blizzard of executive orders, the president has thrown everything from trade deals to international security arrangements into the shredder.
Great thing for the American worker, what we just did.
A new world order is clearly emerging, and tonight on News at 10, we try to assess what it's going to mean for all of us. A thaw in relations with Russia. James Mates is in Moscow asking what Putin really wants from the new rapprochement.
I'm in Berlin to assess Trump's impact on the rise of populism in Germany and beyond.
A new trade war. Debbie Edward is in Beijing asking whether America versus China is the new Cold War. At the front of the queue, as British officials prepare for the Prime Minister's trip, Robert Peston assesses what we could expect from a quick trade deal. And
missile away.
The Trident misfire, the MOD stonewalls at home, but the Americans happily brief on what happened off Florida.
From Washington, this is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening from the White House on President Trump's first full day in the Oval Office. America is already a rapidly changing place tonight. A massive trade deal with Asian nations went straight into the bin. Business leaders were told in no uncertain terms that if they moved production and jobs overseas, they would be hit with punitive tariffs. And there was more, indeed much more, including a continuing fight with the media. But the real point is that it's now more than clear that this radical populist revolution is likely to reverberate around the world with consequences as yet unknowable. We will try to assess the shape of this new world order tonight and its potential impact. But let's begin with the exciting pace of events here in America.
On his first working day in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump confirmed himself to be America's protectionist-in-chief.
Withdrawal from the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
This executive order terminates a free trade deal with Pacific nations.
Everyone knows what that means, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. Thank you. Okay.
The president is also expected to walk away from the North American trade deal, a move that will end the flow of goods tariff-free between the US, Canada and Mexico.
Good morning, everybody.
Earlier today, the president was meeting with some of America's most prominent business leaders, at times extolling his own virtues.
I'm a big person when it comes to the environment. I've received awards on the environment, but
while also warning of the consequences of defying him and moving jobs or factories overseas.
We are going to be imposing a very major border tax on the product when it comes in, which I think is fair, So a company that wants to fire all of its people in the United States and build some factory someplace else and then thinks that that product is going to just flow across the border into the United States, that's not going to happen.
Here we go.
At the first press briefing of the Trump presidency, his spokesman continued to express frustration about the reporting on the crowd size at the inauguration, saying it was part of an anti-Trump media agenda.
The default narrative is always negative, and it's demoralizing. There is this constant theme to undercut the enormous support that he has. And I think it's just unbelievably frustrating when you're continually told it's not big enough, it's not good enough, you can't win.
After his statement on Saturday that had included multiple falsehoods, Spicer was asked if he would now always tell the truth, and he suggested the facts themselves could be debated.
I believe that we have to be honest with the American people. I think sometimes we can disagree with the facts.
But he also had a warning for China, saying America would not accept the militarization of disputed islands.
If those islands are in fact in international waters and not part of China proper, then yeah, we're going to make sure that we defend international territories from being taken over by one country.
Please rise.
Meanwhile, the administration is continuing to be buffeted by leaks and rumors. According to reports, the new National Security Advisor, General Mike Flynn, here being sworn in yesterday, is being investigated by counterintelligence agencies over links with Russia.
Thank you very much.
The president is now ushering in an entirely new era, attacking the very foundations of free trade and globalization. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
In the Middle East, the graveyard of many an American president's foreign policy, the Trump presidency is already having an impact even on day one. His support for the Israeli government has emboldened its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to announce the building of more homes for Jewish settlers in Palestinian territory, to the fury of Palestinians. And Mr. Trump will anger them even more by planning to move the American embassy from Israel's business capital, Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, which is, of course, claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians as their capital.
When it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, Jerusalem is the heart of the matter. Both sides claim the holy city as their capital, and respectful of the sensitivities, the rest of the world has studiously steered clear of putting their embassies in Jerusalem. Today there are only consulates here, but that may be about to change. This, the US Embassy in Tel Aviv, could easily take over the huge US consulate site in Jerusalem. So says the man who monitors land use for the Palestinian Authority. He dreads the consequences of relocation.
It means that we have more wars, we have more massacres, we have more blooded in this area. It means that we have a dark future.
It would be a nail in the coffin of a Palestinian state, in your opinion?
Yes.
An embassy move isn't the only building project that has the support of the Trump administration. The new American ambassador to Israel backs the expansion of Jewish settlements in Jerusalem and on the West Bank. Yesterday, the Israeli authorities announced that approval had been given for almost 600 new settler homes. It's obvious that the more this land is colonized by Israel, the less likely it is to become the state of Palestine. For a generation, the prospect of a two-state solution has been like the North Star in the Holy Land. Not always visible and persistently out of reach, but yet reassuringly present. Extinguish that guiding light, and all bets are off here. Chuck Frelich is a former security advisor to the Israeli government. He says abandoning the goal of a two-state solution would be a tragic mistake.
The two-state solution isn't a favor that anyone was ever doing for Israel. It's, I think, the greatest favor that Israel could possibly do for itself. We want to remain both a democratic and Jewish state.
Only the United States has the clout to bring about an enduring peace deal here. But if President Trump keeps his promises to Israel, then America will no longer be a neutral, honest broker. Peace and Palestine may be off the table. John Irvine, News at 10, Jerusalem.
Now, as John was explaining, Mr. Trump has been very vocal in his support for Israel, and it appears this could be at the heart of his foreign policy. But as well as Israel in the Middle East, he also has to deal with the ongoing conflict in Syria and the influence of the self-styled Islamic State, not only there, but in Iraq too. Plus, there is the war in Yemen, which has become a proxy conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And then, of course, the question of how to deal with Russia, which has already been flexing its muscles in Syria and the Middle East generally. It is a busy in-tray for any incoming president, not least for one with little experience in foreign affairs. As for that relationship between Russia and the United States, can you remember a Russian foreign minister saying that his president sees eye to eye with the American president on many foreign policy goals? No, us neither, but that was the assessment from Moscow today. The key question then, perhaps, is what does Russia actually want, and how many of its ambitions would Mr. Trump be prepared to tolerate?
In the deep freeze of a Russian January, people here are hoping for an early thaw. Not in the weather, it's too soon for that, but in their relations with America, relations that have been frozen as solid as these ice sculptures since Putin ordered troops into Ukraine. Whether or not the Kremlin helped Donald Trump to power, they are delighted now at the prospect the US may be turning isolationist.
President Putin prefers to deal with a nationalist America than an internationalist America?
Yes. I think that he sees that ideally the United States as a great power, dealing with other great powers as co-equals, would make for a better partner in the world.
And he believes he is co-equal to America?
Co-equal in terms of freedom of action.
In his own backyard?
Yes, I think that this is essentially how he sees Russia.
You can look long and hard for a Kremlin plan in all this, but the truth is there may not be one, beyond causing as much disruption and dissent in Washington as they possibly can. An America divided against itself suits Russia very well. A Europe similarly divided would be an added bonus. In the offices of TV Rain, a rare independent broadcaster now only permitted to operate online, they clearly see Putin's next target.
It's isolationist idea, which are now very popular within Eurosceptics, and Russia supports Eurosceptics, and Russia is trying to organize like an Eurosceptic international.
So is this a victory for the Putin worldview?
It's a victory for Putin ideas.
Trump has already found his way onto the Matryoshka dolls that populate every other market stall here, alongside other Russian heroes from Lenin to Putin. But to a beleaguered opposition here, Trump's election is a disaster. Mikhail Kazyanov was Putin's first prime minister before Russia gave up on liberal democracy. He hates what he's seeing in the West.
We're disappointed about Brexit, for instance. We're just very much concerned about French elections and elections in Germany, because we'd like our partners would stay on their values and principles, as we devoted to those principles too.
So every populist victory in Europe or America damages your cause?
Absolutely, absolutely.
The Russian people, almost alone outside America, are big fans of Donald Trump. Like their government, they think they know what they're getting. But they also know that he's unpredictable. And for the most powerful man on earth, that's not always a good quality.
Well, in a moment, we'll chat live with our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore. But first to our Europe editor, James Mates, who is in Moscow. James, there were these reports earlier of military cooperation between the Russians and the Americans in Syria already, denied by the US.
Yeah, an extraordinary claim tonight. The Russians saying that they had carried out a joint operation with the Americans against so-called Islamic State targets in Syria. Now, if true, this would have been a huge change of American policy, because the Russians have mostly just been bombing rebels in support of President Assad. And they've only really coordinated to ensure that their two air forces don't actually bump into one another. Well, the Pentagon very quickly said, no, this is rubbish, it's propaganda. And then the White House spokesman also denied there'd been a joint operation, but said, well, you know, maybe if they want to attack ISIS as well, maybe we will do one in future. Well, you can imagine the confusion that this caused, and that may be precisely what the Russians are trying to achieve, that effectively they're trolling Washington. They're throwing this in there, knowing how much suspicion there is about President Trump and his links to Russia and of members of his cabinet as well. But I have to say, talking to people here over these last few days, they've been enjoying acting like lords of misrule, effectively trying to mess with American democracy. But the reality is they never thought that Donald Trump would win. They thought what they were doing was destabilizing a future Hillary Clinton. And now they are beginning to ask themselves that unpredictability question and wondering whether perhaps they have unleashed forces that one day they may not be able to control.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Now, as you may have noticed at the start, we lost Robert from the other side of Washington, so we'll talk to him later. Now, back on the other side of the Atlantic, it isn't just Mr. Trump inspiring a new world order. Politicians in Europe have been pushing for change in upcoming elections and managing pretty well on their own. Thank you very much. In March, the Dutch hold their general election with far-right candidate Geert Wilders on course to win the most seats and perhaps become the next Prime Minister. The French presidential election concludes in May. Marine Le Pen, leader of the Front National, is likely to be in the final runoff. In June, there could be an Italian general election with the new Prime Minister, Paolo Gentiloni, facing a populist challenge. And in September, Germany holds its federal election, and Frauke Petry, the leader of the anti-immigration AfD party, will be hoping to become a major player in the country's parliament. Now, this weekend, some of Europe's far-right party leaders got together in Germany to celebrate Mr. Trump's success, which they see as a wake-up call for Europe and indeed the world. Julie met Frauke Petry and joins us now from Berlin. Julie, over to you.
Tom, thank you very much. And yes, good evening and welcome to Berlin and the Brandenburg Gate. Just a couple of days ago, just as in cities across Europe and the US, there were some pretty noisy protests against President Trump. And there are very many here at the heart of the EU who are extremely concerned about his attitude towards it and to Germany in particular. He has called Angela Merkel's decision to let the refugees in catastrophic. He's called NATO, as we know, obsolete. And he's also threatened the German car industry with a big increase on its tariffs. But for some, his global stance and his style of politics have become music to their ears, and not least the leader of the Germany party, anti-immigrant party, Alternative für Deutschland, the Alternative for Germany, Frauke Petry, whom I spoke to earlier today. At the party offices in Leipzig, Frauke Petry shows me a collection of defaced campaign posters, a badge of honour for a politician proud to have provoked anger and controversy. She and the fellow populist far-right leaders she joined at the weekend take inspiration from Donald Trump, and she has sent him her congratulations.
People in Germany looked for a platform to live controversy again. And that's what Trump did. He pushed controversy, he pushed provocation so far that it hurt many times.
Part of his campaign was to call for a temporary ban on Muslims coming into the US. Would you agree with him if he carried that out?
We never totally agreed with this ban, but we said that we have to have the right to define the rules of immigration. And what we've seen is illegal immigration into Germany by hundreds of thousands of Muslims who do not accept our rules. And if we ban their immigration into Germany, this is not banning Muslims altogether.
Petry recognises the new relationship between Germany and the US may change, but sees opportunities in it. Would you rather him have a strong relationship with President Putin than perhaps one with Angela Merkel?
Right now, we don't see any other party, apart from the AfD, who's willing to look at the new European-American balance. What we want is a new balance, a new political balance between America, Germany, Europe and Russia.
Like Trump, her provocative views have caused outrage in a country so sensitive to its history, not least when she said border guards were within legal rights to shoot at illegal immigrants, comments she claims were taken out of context. Some critics have called you Adolfine, Führerin. What's your response to that?
This is something you don't take easily. We are sort of dehumanized. We have been dehumanized.
But people would say
by main media.
But people would say that you're dehumanising Muslims in Germany.
Well, then I think I have no problem at all to explain our arguments.
If you had a message for Donald Trump as he begins his presidency in this first week, what would it be?
I hope he keeps this. He keeps his unconventional way, and I hope that he will be in good contact, because I think to discuss a new positive way of living together, of having trade partnerships and political partnerships, always requires to talk to each other. And we offer these talks, and I hope we will have them in the near future.
Frauke Petry of the German AfD party talking to Julie there, as you saw. Julie, can you put this into a bit of context for us? How much pressure is her party actually putting on Mrs. Merkel?
Well, they are putting pressure on Mrs Merkel, but let's be clear, they've got pretty much zero chance of winning power in Germany. They're polling at around 10 to 15% currently, and to get any form of power in that national government, they'd have to go into coalition, and none of the key parties, the main parties here, want to share power with them, so that is a clear obstacle towards them. But it is worth noting that in a similar vein to UKIP, the pressure that they're putting on the main parties is actually getting them to recalibrate their own positions, the party's main positions. And we've seen, particularly with Angela Merkel, she's now said that Germany has done enough for refugees. She also, just before the new year, said that she would now back her own party's call for a partial ban on the wearing of the full face veil for Muslims. So they have that sort of incremental impact in German politics. And it's also worth stressing that they have had an impact in regional politics. They are now represented in 10 of Germany's 16 states and actually beat Angela Merkel's own party in one of those elections most recently.
And we heard Donald Trump obviously criticising Angela Merkel a week or so ago. Talk us through that relationship. I mean, pretty critical for the Germans as much as for us.
Well, they see it absolutely as a cornerstone of their foreign policy, of course, here, and it is going to be fascinating to see how that relationship unfolds, not least, of course, because of the extraordinarily close relationship that Angela Merkel had with President Obama. I mean, he praised her as being his closest international supporter. So how this now unfolds will be fascinating. Worth noting that she didn't actually sit down to watch his inaugural speech on Friday. She was opening a museum in Potsdam, but when she did get to listen to the speech, she said that it made Trump's convictions perfectly clear. But she is a politician who is a pragmatist. She also proceeds with great caution and compromise, and that is the key to her message ahead of any meeting that she finally has with President Trump, that is, she is willing to compromise and she will look at the values that they can share together. Of course, at this stage, we don't know when the two of them will meet yet, but it will be a crucial moment, not just for her, but also a pivotal moment in his early presidency as we try to chart the way his relationship with the European Union and, crucially, Germany progresses.
OK, Julie, thank you very much indeed. Well, while the countries of Europe plot their courses for the future, Britain, as we know, will be going its own way. Prosperity will depend on negotiating new trade deals with, amongst others, Mr. Trump's America. So, as Mrs. May prepares to fly there later this week, there has been plenty of advice on the type of deal she should aim for and how best to negotiate it.
Special relationships which shaped recent history. Reagan and Thatcher, who ushered in the age of private business and free markets. Blair and Bush, who took us into that disastrous war in Iraq. And now, Trump and May. Will their legacy make us cheer or weep? Jonathan Powell, as Chief of Staff to Tony Blair, twice had to matchmake between the then Prime Minister and two successive presidents, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush.
It's the most important relationship that a British Prime Minister has, and it's going to be even more important if we leave the EU, because we're going to only have one alliance, not two.
So what advice would you give to the Prime Minister about how to handle this first meeting?
Well, the most important thing is to go and ask for something. Now, I wouldn't go and ask for a trade agreement, because we can't negotiate trade agreement for years. But I would go and ask about NATO. I would ask the President to commit the United States to safeguarding NATO.
Karen von Hippel worked for the US government under Obama. Does she think Donald Trump will succeed in his apparent desire to be Ronald Reagan to Theresa May's Margaret Thatcher?
I don't expect them to be bosom buddies. I don't think there'll be a lot of chemistry, but I think they'll find common ground in a few issues that matter. Don't forget, I think he gave only one foreign policy speech so far, so it's not entirely clear what he will advocate anyway.
Theresa May will press the case for a free trade deal with the US because America is our largest national market, taking around 12% of our exports, although that is less than a third of what we sell to the European Union. But in 2015, we sold almost £40 billion more goods and services to America than they sold to us. We did better out of the trading relationship than they did. Given that America has a big deficit on its trade with Britain, why on earth should Donald Trump give us a great new trade deal?
Well, they certainly won't be looking to increase the size of the deficit. I think Trump's made that clear. But look, both the US will be looking to increase their exports and we'll be looking to increase our exports as well. So I think to have a trade deal, and a good one for Britain, done within 2 years, the time we exit the EU, that's going to be close to impossible.
Remember this pair of regular guys, Obama and Cameron, a great double act, frying burgers. But great creators in the red-hot kitchen of foreign affairs? Few would say that. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Now to China, where on the face of it, they should be pretty angry at the stream of insults that have been directed their way by Mr. Trump. Accusations of stealing American jobs and threats of a trade war. Does the rhetoric matter? Well, yes, of course, if you consider the rapidity with which China is rising as a power and the potential flashpoints in the likes of the South China Sea. Today, in public at least, China said it was looking forward to working with the Trump administration. But Mr. Trump's hostility to the Chinese is arguably one of the biggest question marks over the new world order.
Carefully hand-painted and made with an astute attention to detail, these Donald Trump-inspired gifts for the Year of the Rooster depict a man the Chinese are otherwise finding it difficult to decipher. An American president who has repeatedly painted China as the enemy. Today, the Foreign Ministry gave its first reaction to Donald Trump's inauguration speech.
Does President Trump's America First agenda set the stage for a trade war, and is that a possibility you are preparing for?
There will be no winner in a trade war. China and America should work together on economic cooperation and on the basis of respect and equality.
President Trump has accused China of stealing American jobs, flooding the market with cheap goods, and manipulating its currency. Cao De Wang owns the world's biggest windscreen manufacturer and currently employs 3,000 people in the United States, with plans to expand this year.
Trump wants manufacturing brought back to America, and that's what I'm doing. If the American market needs our products and our products need the American market, we have a deal. It's based on mutual benefit.
Last year, Chinese investment in the US hit a record £43 billion, up over 300% on the year before. But the new American president doesn't think dealing with China is quite so clear-cut.
Donald Trump has criticised China for not giving American manufacturers access to the Chinese market, while companies like Fuyao are free to set up and operate in the United States. He has declared it's time to negotiate some new trade arrangements between the world's top two economies.
Cooperation is the new watchword at China's Ministry of Commerce, but they are also readying themselves for conflict.
If Mr. Trump wants a trade war, we are not afraid. But without China, the biggest contributor to the world economy, how can he make America great again?
They have never entirely worked in tandem, but for the first time in a long time, an American president appears willing to push China to the limits of diplomacy. Debbie Edwards, News at 10, Fuzhou, southern China.
Well, before Theresa May heads here later in the week for her front of the queue meeting with Mr. Trump, she'll be hoping the row over what she knew about a failed Trident missile test will have ended. She again had the chance today to say what she knew after she became Prime Minister, but before a big vote on renewing the nuclear defence system. All she said was that she was told about the test, not whether she knew it had failed.
Trident nuclear missiles are Britain's last line of defence, but today the Prime Minister was having to defend them, following reports that a test missile had failed just weeks before she asked Parliament to renew the system.
We don't comment on the operational details for national security reasons, but the key issue about the debate that we had in the House of Commons on future Trident was whether we should renew Trident for the future. Should we continue to have an independent nuclear deterrent? I have absolute faith in our independent nuclear deterrent.
In June, the unarmed missile was launched from HMS Vengeance. The normal test route would be from the coast of Florida towards the coast of West Africa. But at some point, this missile is reported to have malfunctioned.
Dive the submarine.
The government insists it doesn't comment on operational details, but it has publicly announced successful tests and even released this video of the last one.
Missile away. LAS is receiving telemetry.
But some MPs are angry because although the test took place 3 days before the EU referendum in June, and Mrs May was told about it when she became Prime Minister in July, she then advocated renewal of the submarines in the House of Commons without mentioning the problem. So today the Defence Secretary was ordered into Parliament to answer MPs' questions.
We are not asking the Secretary of State to disclose any sensitive or inappropriate detail. All we want is clarity and transparency. Can I ask the Secretary of State a simple question? Why was this information deliberately kept from Parliament and the British public?
Can the Secretary of State tell me, when did he first find out about this missile failure? Was it he who informed the new Prime Minister about the failure? And who took the decision not to inform Parliament of this incident?
But the Defence Secretary has a reputation for deflecting difficult questions.
We do not comment on the detail of submarine operations. I can assure the House that the capability and effectiveness of the United Kingdom's independent nuclear deterrent is not in doubt.
Yet, as he was on his feet, an American military source confirmed to US media that there had been a problem with the missile and it had been deliberately crashed into the sea. Sources here indicate that the fault lay with the flow of information coming back from the missile, although all the government will say officially is that the submarine and her crew passed their part of the test. Yet they have not denied at any point that there was a problem with the missile. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
Among the many questions raised by the decision of Sinn Féin's Martin McGuinness to step away from politics was who would succeed him as party leader in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Step forward Michelle O'Neill. She'll lead the party into Assembly elections. Miss O'Neill said that getting the job was the biggest honour and privilege of her life. The name of Bernie Ecclestone has been synonymous with Formula One for almost 40 years, but this evening he has been replaced as its boss. The writing has been on the wall for Mr. Ecclestone for a while, who is 86 since last September. That's when the American sports and entertainment group Liberty Media bought Formula One. He told a German magazine he was deposed today by the new owners. He has, though, been offered a new post as honorary chairman. And one of the most famous faces of television comedy in the 1980s, Gordon Kay, who starred in 'Allo 'Allo, has died. He'll be forever remembered for playing René Artois as the cafe owner in Nazi-occupied France. There's a full report about him over on our website, and there's more of today's news there, of course. Now, it's an iron law of television that you can go wherever you are to the other side of the world, not necessarily to the other side of your city. However, we have our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore, back. Robert, we've been looking at the impact across the globe today. It feels like this is a radical change in foreign policy terms. Do you think that's correct?
Yes, I do, Tom. I mean, let's just think about this. Donald Trump today embraced protectionism. In one sense, no surprise. We've heard that sort of fiery populist rhetoric on the campaign trail for about 18 months. But still, it is radical stuff in many ways. This is the reversal of decades of economic policy here. You know, as you know, Tom, economists don't agree on many things, but there's a near consensus that free trade is a positive policy. And yet this is, by President Trump, a kind of all-out assault on the orthodoxy of the establishment and indeed of his own Republican Party. The question going forward is, does he take this radicalism into other areas? Does he really regard NATO as obsolete? Does he really regard Russia potentially as more friend than foe? So we don't know the extent of this change at this stage. You know, the bureaucracy here has a famed ability to slow down policies it doesn't like. But really, at the end of this first full working day of the Trump presidency, I'm kind of left looking at it and thinking, goodness me, this is really an America going in a very different direction indeed.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. And that is it from the White House, the Trump White House as it is now for tonight. Day one of his presidency was as unorthodox as we might have expected. Just 1,458 to go then. I will be back in the studio in London tomorrow, but for now, good night. And thank you very much indeed for watching.